Welcome back, everyone. Zimmermann, what is the series called again?
The secret behind the female muscle.
Today we will introduce our guest Ross, who is, for people watching female bodybuilding channel, he has had the most watched pods. He had a seminar with Callum, but he did most of all the talking, I believe, Ross, wasn't it?
I do a lot of seminar work, yeah. In this topic specifically.
How many athletes went up to the Ross female bodybuilding seminar you had? How many was it?
Oh man. Online it must have been like 80 people.
Yeah.
Which was cool. And then we teach a lot of in-person seminars, and then obviously I teach on Pro IQ, which is the education platform that I run as well.
Okay.
So I'm proper excited, man. Very excited.
Good. Exciting to have you on. We're going to talk about something that's very used in the land of female bodybuilding, figure, women's physique, and also bikini. We see a lot of people using it with success, a lot of people using it with not so much success. And if we can break it really simple, we can start with you, Ross. If you can explain T3 and T4, what is that? Easy explain, so people can know the difference between T3 and T4.
Okay, so first of all, T3 and T4, they are pharmaceutical or synthetic versions of hormones that we already have that are called T3 and T4. They have the exact same name. That's triiothyronine and tetrodatrohyd, crazy ad names. And essentially what they do is they regulate your body's ability to create and utilize energy. So it's obviously food for energy that we speak about all the time. That's the kind of main privateer of what we tend to speak about when we talk about T3 and T4 in this context, but it's also ATP regulation, which is just like cellular regulation. You need that to survive. You need that to wake up. Anything to do with energy regulation, T3 and T4 are a part of. Now, when it comes to the synthetic use of T3 and T4, what we often find is that because T3 and T4, in a natural sense, they sit on what's called the thyroid axis. Okay, when you expose yourself to low energy availability, which is essentially just a prep, okay, chronic low energy availability, think of all the
one question there. When you say a prep, does that mean right from the beginning? Does that mean just when the calories are lower, or does it mean after a couple of weeks?
The credentials of the process, the idea of lowering food and increasing output over a long period of time. Doing that for a sustained period dysregulates the thyroid in terms of your natural thyroid output. So the idea that we have is that as you begin to dysregulate, you replace. But obviously in bodybuilding, we don't really replace. We think, let's do fucking loads of that and, really reap rewards as much as we can. But the predominant difference is that T4 is what's called an inactive version of thyroid hormone. And then you got T3, which is the active version of thyroid hormone, all right? Most people are using T3 from a perspective of super physiological use. They're using larger amounts of T3 to drive the metabolic processes associated with fat loss, okay? That's what people tend to use T3 for. T4 is an inactive version of thyroid hormone. T4's normal kind of function is to provide a substrate pool, which is basically just enough of itself to convert into T3. T4's job is essentially to become T3. That's what T4 is for. The reason that we see T4 used in like normal PED stacks on a day-to-day basis is because what we're seeing is early stage decline in thyroid output. So by using T4, which is more upstream, the term that we use is upstream when we're talking about anything that comes before the end result, we go upstream. We provide the substrate by taking it in the morning rather than relying on the brain to create it. And then that processes into natural T3.
Well, one question, Zimmermann, about this. When would you then, so before we go into what it does, why do some people introduce it in a prep right away? Is that something you need? Do you need to check your blood work, Zimmermann, before you do this? Or is this something you, like, how do you decide if you need this or not? Because there's a lot of girls using it, a lot of girls do not use this, Zimmermann. How would you know the difference if you need to use it or not?
Yeah, like Ross said, I mean, like you're training hard, doing cardio, lowering food, increasing stress and all these markers. And I think especially women tend to like adapt hard to this. So this is why many female coaches start this right from the beginning. But I would say it should be adjusted by blood work. So if you have a normal range of thyroid like T3 and T4, in my opinion, there's no need for it. And the longer you can prep without T3 and 4, the better it is. So putting this into a contest prep right from like 16 weeks out, would be, and I don't think it's needed before like 8 to 10 weeks out.
Yeah,
This is
the issue. The thing that is the thing that becomes difficult is putting a time frame on it, because what you're asking yourself is how long is it taking for any individual female's natural hormone production
But
to get
how often do you see like set plans, like already, okay, at 8 weeks out you start eight, 10, 12 weeks
all
out
the
you
time.
start clan like this.
All the time,
That's
and
the
that's
main problem.
for sure. That's why we're faced with so much confusion all the time. You know, like what you're dealing with. Like the reason that the female axis tends to suppress harder is because females are smaller by nature. Do you know, the kind of way? There's less of them. They've got lower lean mass. They have a lower metabolic baseline. So the actual headroom for their ability to handle prep is lower. Now, if you have athletes like you have, Rafaela, we've had in the past, experienced pro athletes, right? Here's where you start to have the conversation that can't be fixed. This is where you start to have conversations where you can't just say, do it this way. And this is where the confusion is. The problem is that if you have an athlete who's prepped for 4 or 5 years in the trot, they're Olympia level figure, they're high level, pro level wellness, they're prepping and they're demanding enough of their own body that they're not really going to get the opportunity to come in and out of thyroid use at all. For them, they're probably going to maintain some kind of pattern where they're using T3 and T4 throughout prep. As they move into the off season, they might transition back to just T4, because then you don't have to deal with the full recovery process, but you're still maintaining natural fluidity between the thyroid T4 to T3. So the problem that you have is that people want to have an answer. People are asking you every single day, or asking me every single day, when should I take thyroid? When should I take clen? When should I take anything? The answer is that unless I sit here and I look at every single period of time that you've had up until this point, I can't give you a definitive answer. But what we can do is let's get some blood work done. Or if you've done this...
if we can go into that now. So as you guys are saying, we don't know exactly when to start using that individual base.
For
correct?
Sure.
Yes.
Correct.
So when you and Zimmermann say, let's take a look at the blood work. So if an athlete now, they're 16 weeks out, what should they check? And let's say you want to check your blood before T3 and T4 use. What should they ask to check exactly?
So if you're looking at just thyroid, you should be getting a comprehensive thyroid panel. A comprehensive thyroid panel should have TSH, T3, T4, and another one that's less known called reverse T3. So reverse T3 is something that we call an inactive isomer. So when someone says, oh, my thyroid dropped off, or when someone says, oh, I have low thyroid, what they actually have is high reverse T3. That is the mechanism of low thyroid. The mechanism of low T3 is high reverse T3. Yeah, understood? We get that? Sweet as. So that's the mechanism that you're measuring. So if you're going and you're getting lower outputs of T3, you can probably be pretty happily thinking that you're going to get reverse T3 on the higher end. Fully comprehensive, that's ideal. You can then also look for something called TPO. TPO is an antibody for thyroid. So basically that might get a little bit fancy, but essentially if you know your thyroid is having to deal with antibodies, you know there's a certain level of inflammation and stress on the body, and you're registering that as part of the equation when you're trying to register somebody's bloods. That's essentially how you're operating. That's your comprehensive panel.
How hard it is to get the reverse T3 in Germany.
It's everywhere.
I'm very happy when they get the T3 and T4.
Yeah, for sure, man. Or even or somebody goes, oh, I got my thyroid done, and they just give you TSH, and you're like, I can do nothing.
Like that.
Yeah. So Zimmermann, a little bit easier then. So what can you check that you actually can check? Because I live in Scandinavia, you're in Germany, UK, and America are a little bit advanced when it comes to blood work. You guys have a lot better system for it. But girls in Slovakia and in Sri Lanka, they don't have all this. So what can we ask for the basics we need to see before implementing T3 or T4? So the basics.
Yeah, I mean, like the other markers about fatigue level or stress level, because if somebody is already really stressed out and like on low food, high cardio, going into a prep, then it's probably if you then check T3 and T4, it's not based on just how long the prep goes, because then you need just more of a recovery phase to fix these naturally instead of implementing T3 and T4. I mean, normal T3 intake, you normally don't get T3 prescribed. You always get levothyroxine, it's called in Germany. T4 and like Ross said, this is basically the storage hormone, and T3 is the active hormone. But it converts into T3. So I would say T3 and T4 is already plenty, and a lot of coaches are happy when they have only these markers to see at least if they are in check, and then you need to check if you're constantly tired or like you're.
That's enough.
How would you know the problem is with the T3 T4, Ross, and not constantly tired? Because a lot of athletes get tired on prep anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So here's my question to you: why are they tired?
Yeah. Low food. They're not recovery. They're sleeping bad. There's a lot of issues.
Perfect. So what does that cause? What's the result of all those things? What's the result of low food, high output, and poor sleep?
Yeah, a stressed body and bad thyroid gets ruined.
Yes, there you go. Boom. That's it. That is why it happens. That is the whole mechanism. That's why these things. So the reason you're tired is because, so remember we said the thyroid is regulating energy demand.
Yes.
So it regulates ATP-based energy demand. So that's a really fancy way for saying just about everything, right?
Okay.
So when you have lower ends of thyroid, you have lower energy regulation in total. So everything you just described, everything you described that every single athlete watching this recognizes in their head, that I can't stand up feeling, that I can't believe I have to do this next cardio session. Some of that is obviously fatigue in the latter end. If you're already using T3 and T4 and fat burners, you're probably just fucked up, But if you're like 12 weeks out and you're not using any thyroid and you're feeling like an absolute bag of shit and you've done this before, and maybe your coach says, no, it's only 6 weeks out. Maybe you need to step back and have a little bit of a conversation and be like, why is it only at 6 weeks out? Why is it only at 8 weeks out? Why am I into these cemented conditions of what drugs to use when the drugs that I'm being cemented into using don't work off cemented action? It doesn't make any sense.
So to make it so perform easy, so if athletes check their levels or they feel they want to start using it, or as you're saying, they're very low and all this with energy and they want to implement it, do you need Zimmermann to start with T and T4, or is it possible to just start with one, or would you need a combination both? In your opinion, first, Zimmermann.
In my opinion, it depends on how bad the situation is and how T3 and T4 look, and then how their habits are, how their routines are, etc. So also again, very individual.
Okay,
for sure.
And often it's harder for them to get T3 than T4. They easily get T4.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
For sure.
So you guys can say it's not so easy to answer if they need both T3 and T4. You're saying that it depends on the situation.
Blood work will tell you everything. So you get blood work, right? Your blood work is going to have a bit. Let's go with the absolute bare minimum blood work that every athlete watching this can get. TSH, T3, T4. Every single one of you here can get that. The common read that you'll find is TSH will be high, because usually what TSH is doing is communicating downstream to produce T4 and T3. But there's not enough production, so it's shouting really loud and nothing's happening. Eventually what will happen is that TSH signal will also be low, because the body basically says, fuck it, I'm not doing it anymore, basically. T3 is below that. You'll have a reference range for T3. You'll have a reference range for T4. You're assessing whether they're sitting within the ranges that you want them to be. And then you decide whether you're going to make a reactive or a proactive decision. A reactive decision is where you address only what you see. A proactive decision is where you address what is likely to happen based off what you know. Raf, you've done this, we've done this, hundreds of times we've prepped athletes. How many times have you just known an athlete needs their next dose of T4 or T3? You just know. You just know by doing it and doing it and doing it. So blood work gives you the immediate point in time. And then honestly, having an experienced coach gives you the rest. So it's just understanding that these things, with all drugs, it's the old school way of prepping where you're telling athletes when and what to take at X week. It makes no sense. It doesn't make any sense, and it's lazy coaching. Do you know what I mean? But at the same time, I say the word lazy and I step back. That kind of coaching has also produced some of the best bodybuilders in the world. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to sit here and tout it as a problem, because all I'm here to do is to give people more information on the process and not tout mine as better.
That's true. I mean, kind of like when you see check-ins, then you have this feeling that, okay, now we up the T3, and
you just know.
Not always that you say, okay, next blood work now, we up the T3. This is not realistic, but
no, never.
It's like you said, sometimes you just see.
Sometimes you just know, and I think that's probably where the whole educator thing needs the gap being brought. You've got all these educators, people who kind of like me, educate on shit, and they're like, oh, you can only do things this way. Fucking no. If you actually want to win bodybuilding shows, sometimes you have to break the rules a little bit. My thing is, I just want to know as much as I can about the rules that I'm breaking, so that it makes more sense when I break them. Do you know?
So guys, you're saying for a young woman that just start, well, she could be whatever age, you wouldn't really start implementing T3, T4 without having a coach who has experience in this, correct?
Yeah, and just getting blood work. Just get the blood work. Like, literally just get the blood work. Even if it's just TSH, give yourself something to go off. Okay. That's the only thing. Once you have something to go off, and again, your coach might just know. Sometimes you just know, but especially if you're the archetype where you've never never done this before, then 100% always investigate with blood work. But we all know athletes who just, they know how they do shit, they know what works for them, and they repeat it. But until then, we're all fucking pie in the sky, you know? So get your blood work, assess, have somebody who understands, read it. If your coach doesn't understand, that's absolutely fine. Some people value other things. Get them to go to somebody else who does know how to read it. It's simple.
Zimmermann, if you start with T3 and T4, the hell, I don't want to say I don't want to say recommend, we're not allowed to say, but like you want to start obviously a little bit lower. How much of each T3 and T4 would you start with, and how is the range between T3 and T4 in the beginning when you implement?
This is also very hard to say, but most of the time you see something like 25 T3 to 100 T4, and then you titrate up, and then you end up maybe like 50 T3 and 150 T4. But I saw someone doing like 250 T4. I think that's insane. But I think it's way healthier to do a contest prep on thyroid medication on a hormonal side. No, we're not talking about the organic side. And
but can we go back one more time, so people can hear? So you would start with, as you said, not you specifically, but you would say 25 T3 and 100 T4. So that's times 4. Is that what you're saying? The T3, the T4 is 4 times as high as the T3. The T4 is 4 times as high as the T3. Is what you're saying?
Yes.
Why is that?
I know the answer to that, and I think it's really important that I say one thing. If you're a female, you have to remember that T3 output and T3 changes in T3 output are going to affect you more and are going to have more risk on muscle than they are for a man. Okay, that's really important. So like the starting dose of 25 is honestly probably a bit high. I'll be real. The reason that the split is there is because in normal physiology, the 80% of thyroid output is T4 and 20% is T3. That's why the gap is there. It mimics normal physiology. If you only have 20% of the active, which is roughly, I would recommend closer to 12.5 T3 if you're going to start with T3 as a female. And if you get blood work and you can start with T4 alongside a low dose of T3, always do that.
So then you will see 12.5 and around 50 T4 then?
Exactly. There's nearly always going to be that 50% cut. So if it's 25 and 100, which is usually kind of like, that's like your standard, so 25, 100 is like 125 to 150 milligrams of testosterone. That's like HRT for thyroid output. Whereas if you're a female, you have to remember that because thyroid output is regulating energy systematically, if you don't have enough of an anabolic base of support, which honestly, compared to like the likes of a male who might run 50 micrograms of T3, look, I'll be real, I'm not here to morally judge any girl for what drugs they do, but you're probably not doing as much as Samson Dowda is. You're probably not doing as much as these upper guys are. They have the support. So it's really important to understand that when you're moving towards thyroid regulation, it's systemic energy regulation, and you should taper up slower. Unless, of course, you know from historic prep after prep after prep after prep that 25-100 decision is your one. Just be very, very careful if you're a female and you're going in.
Why can't you, for instance, Zimmermann, why do you need to, if you start at 12.5 to 50 T4 and you are a 70 kilos figure athlete going down to a 60 kilo stage weight, for instance. Do you need to taper up?
That's what I want to say. If you have someone who is 200 pounds, I would say 12.5 is a bit low.
That's fair.
What I do is more in the end. If you notice that they just burn through the whole carbs, etc. In the very end, like the last 3 to 4 weeks, then I often reduce it to 12.5. That you have kind of a baseline. But if you have, of course, someone who is only 120 pounds, then 25 is probably a bit much, and you're on the safer side. While
when you say too much, Zimmermann, what does that mean? That means you start burning the muscle and not the fat.
What? No.
When you say a little bit too much,
when you're very glycogen sensitive, and of course T3 burns muscles at a certain point, but you always, I think, to come in real this female conditioning, which is required, you just sacrifice some muscles here and there. But I also mean that when you're very glycogen sensitive and you have a too high T3 dose, then your metabolism is just burning through the carbs, and you just get like lighter and lighter every day. I saw this a lot of times. You're just increasing carb, and the next day the weight drops again. So maybe then lowering T3 adding more fats in, slower this down. So this is what I did a lot of times in the past. Towards the end of the prep, you don't go higher with the T3, you maybe lower it. So
yeah, and I do the exact same thing. I do the same thing going in as I do going out. So I think, Raf, you're saying you'll go straight in with the likes of 25. For me, I will taper in. I'll get to that 25, sometimes even 37.5. I don't remember the last time I got above that with a female. I honestly don't remember the last time I got above 37.5 with a female at all. So it's the same kind of process. I think once you have an exit strategy, because what you're really trying to make sure of when you're dosing T3 too high is that it doesn't sacrifice the look, because T3 won't differentiate unless you have enough of an anabolic support to differentiate between the signal. But if you're a female, you simply just don't have a massive amount of support as much as a man does.
Can you eat more on T3 and T4 during prep as a woman? Can you eat more food?
Technically, yeah, but that would defeat the point. You know, it's because it's increasing your metabolism. You could technically be like, oh, I'm going to increase my metabolism and eat more, but it would be, well, that's just to me, that's it's stepping over dollars to pick over dimes. You know, like it doesn't make.
Quick question about
this. Some do exactly like this. They start 16 weeks out with 25 T3 by thinking, this way I can give her more food, lower like this, and this is why everybody thinks T3 is a fat burner. It's not. This is probably the biggest misconception online.
Okay,
exactly.
T3 is a fat burner, but it's
no, it's not. It's not. There's only the only actual fat burning drug really is clenbuterol. It's the only actual fat burning drug. So what Raf is saying is that what people are doing is they're going, oh, it's prep time, it's fat loss time, it's T3 time. Exactly. You go into prep, right? You're the fattest you're going to be. You're probably doing the least amount of cardio. You're probably eating the most amount of food. Your fucking thyroid is fine. You know, it's fine. So you go and you start taking T3 and T4 straight out the gate from prep. You've got a normal thyroid output. Within 2 or 3 weeks, or maybe a little bit more, less, your body just flips. And now it only relies on the thyroid that you're taking exogenously because you've just shut down your own thyroid at 15 weeks out. So you've just unnecessarily put yourself through thyroid dysregulation for no reason.
So how do can you start with T3, T4 during prep and then take it out during prep, or do you have to keep it all the way?
Again, it makes absolutely no sense to do something like that. So it makes, because when you
lower it, but not drop.
Yeah, definitely you can undulate the dose. Like there's no reason you can't undulate the dose. So let's say you have somebody who's got show number one is New York Pro, and then the next show is 4 weeks later in Miami, which I'm pretty sure is the calendar this is at this point in time.
Something like this, yeah.
They have a lot of work to do towards that first show, okay, and they know they need to really bump it, and they really need to push it leading into Pittsburgh or leading into New York or whatever. They go and they bump a T3 37.5, 50 or whatever. There's now going to be a period of time where following that show, following what was probably already a taper in peak week, so you're keeping your food steady, you've now got 4.5 weeks. 4.5 weeks of that much thyroid when you're already that lean, probably not going to be the greatest thing in the world for your body. You might find that somebody might drop down to 25 or 12.5 and kind of almost like re-instigate the taper back up again. That's something I've often found myself doing, where if I see long gaps between shows, I'll slowly bring that overall lipolytic and thyroid output down. I'll bring clen down as well. It just allows that system to settle down a little bit. It allows a lot of these kind of receptors, your central nervous system, to settle itself back down again. But if you were to like take thyroid out completely, you're removing what is now the only thing that regulates your metabolism. So it makes no sense.
So Zimmermann, show stops, the last show of the season. They've been prepping, dieting for 20 weeks from first show to the last 3-4 shows. What happens with your 3-3-4? Do you shut it completely off? And how long do you get normal again? Or do you taper off? And for how long? And also with athletes who are not binge eating, who are not going crazy after the show, who's going after the show with a normal, keeping your cardio in 3 times a week, as you recommended many times. You're eating maybe the first week, but then you're back to a normal off-season plan. We're not going crazy so that your body adjusts. You're not going crazy. I know some are doing it. Do you need to keep the T3, T4 in for a while to taper down, or can you just stop? And when do you become normal without checking your blood?
Yeah, without checking your blood, you don't know.
So how long to keep it in? And do we taper or not?
Depends on what you did in your contest prep. When you were at 50 T3, always taper down. I always taper it down. I never just completely.
Fully agree. Fully
from
agree.
from off right
For
after.
how long?
You need to imagine like you're on for 8 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever, and then all of a sudden you stop your exogenous thyroid intake. This leads always to kind of a rebound effect. Is the wrong word, but definitely
Technically a rebound effect. Technically, that's the perfect word for it.
So let's say like at least another, let's say we're at 37.5, at least another 2 weeks of 25, then at least another 2 weeks of 12.5, and then we check, and then we say, okay, we're in a state where it's okay, then we might drop it out, and then recheck it in another 4 to 6 weeks, and there you go. So take at least like 4 to 6 weeks after the prep, where you make sure you have some T3 on hand, because you're not stopping it right after the show.
Oh, definitely not.
Last question that's important. So, why can it be better or sometimes to implement T3 for? Can it be healthier for a prep to use it?
Right. I'm glad that kind of came up because that was my last point. So, the more experienced the athlete, the more likely you are going to have to use T3 and T4.
Why?
Because the more that you the more that you place your body under the level of chronic low energy availability associated with prep, if you're a high level athlete, if you're a pro athlete and you're throwing in other compounds that are likely going to be affecting those axes, which all intersect in the same place, i.e. AAS, steroids, you are going to find yourself slower and slower to recover those axes every time you dysregulate them. So what will happen is that the more that you prep, the more value that you will have to regulate your thyroid output from the beginning. So to add to Raf's tapering process there, what you might find the more experienced that you become is that your tapering process, let's say you're using 37.5 T3 and 100 T4, whatever it may be. You follow the exact same process that Raf laid out, roughly 2 weeks at 25, maybe even another 3 or 4 weeks at 12.5, reassessing. But the entire time you might find you maintain T4 throughout the entire taper. So it means that when you get to the end and when you get to the point where you no longer need the T3, you still have the substrate availability that your body needs. You've managed all the stress. You've recomposited your body fat, which is actually the thing that regulates your thyroid output, is actually body fat, is the amount of body fat you have and the amount of stress that you don't have, in the simplest way I can possibly say it to you. So by using that, you find that your ability to regulate things and stabilize things. So for example, how many bodybuilders do you know who don't have some form of TRT for most of the year? It's the exact same.
Not so many women, but men. But women is so
Well, women in the UK, I'd argue, are a little bit different. My point.
Are we against? A quick question about that. Just a yes or no. Zimmermann, are you really for TRT? A fem test for women after show and for months and months with bridging with TRT? Yes or no, Zimmermann?
No, I don't do this, but...
Okay, Ross, what about you?
Yes, I am.
Okay, stop. That's a much longer discussion. Then we're going to have a good episode in the future. Zimmermann versus Ross, this TRT, because that's very mixed feelings. That's going to be good. Back to the T3. Zimmermann, so you're saying it can be healthier when you're on steroids and whatever to actually use T3 and T4, because it can be, so when people say, oh, you're crazy, you're using T3, 4, it can actually be sometimes healthier, is what you're saying.
Not when you're using steroids, not because of that, but because you're dieting hard, your output is very hard, body temperature drops, energy output drops, recovery gets worse, etc., etc. Then on a hormonal side, it's healthier, yes. On an organic side, no. But combining it with fat burners like Clen and etc., high dose thyroid use, like with stimulants, extreme deficit, can also absolutely destroy your physique, because it can also create some kind of a flat look.
Yeah, I saw that with that bodybuilder. I'm not going to mention name. I mean, Ross, you know the black guy from the UK. I saw the pictures. I saw Dan, you know, the amateur, Dan Tobby or whatever his name is. He was big.
Yes. Yeah.
What I want to say is also the cardiac stress and the risk of anxiety and stuff like this.
Yeah, well, that is the reason. That's the reason that you dysregulate in the first place. Is although the only reason that thyroid drops in the first place is because of what the central nervous system is registered around it, which is just stress. It's just any kind of stress. The whole reaction is best explained by the idea of thinking like a caveman. If you think like a caveman and a caveman has no food and it's trapped in the cave, the body will lower its metabolic output so that you don't eat your own body, right? You don't eat into your own fuel sources. That's why these things happen. They happen because it happened to cavemen, but we've decided that the stress that we want to induce is I'm going to do fucking 60 minutes of Stairmaster and 120 milligrams of Winstrol a day, you know? That's the stress that I'm going to decide. But it's the same system. It's the same system. But because we now have this long period of time where athletes are more and more aggressively enhanced and they're doing more and more things to get where they are, the physiology that we're dealing with is just more and more complex. That understandings like this and conversations like this they're needed, big time.
But so a bikini girl would need a lot less T3 and T4 than a women's physique girl, guys, is what we're saying, yeah? Or a figure girl, a big figure girl.
Better way of putting it is that higher doses of T3 carry more risk for smaller athletes. That's a better way of putting it. There might be a use case for a female athlete who's a bikini. Like, you might have a bikini athlete who comes up and is like, I've got fucking 7 weeks to be ready. You might have to turn around and go fucking get yourself some T3 and lots of it. You might have to do that sometimes. So in that case, I don't want to turn around and say no. But in like a traditional use case scenario with a bikini athlete, you're not going to need mass into T3. Again, lower overall mass is indicative of a higher overall risk with poor T3 use. The lowest mass athletes are bikini athletes and fit model, if you can call them athletes. I'll be real, not my thing.
Oh, don't say that loud. Zimmermann, I see we got 2 minutes left. Something you want to end with that's important for T3, T4, something?
Yeah, like Ross said, they are just metabolic regulators, and like everything else in bodybuilding, context matters, dosage timing matters, recovery matters, and everything else matters. And it's so individual. That's why there's no set plan. And if you got a set plan where you get to introduce T3 at a certain point without all these markers
run away
then this is not the right thing. But there are so many factors who leading into when to use T3 and T4 and how much that you cannot give a certain answer for any class, and always do your research.
Yeah. Okay. If you guys, we have the information to Zimmermann, obviously, here in the episode. If athletes, if you need your help with T3 and T4 and other things, and you found what Ross is saying interesting, contact him on Instagram. We're going to put the links up, and we will be, are you promising that you will be man enough, Raphael or Ross, to have a real debate without studying before about TRT in women? Can we do that in the future?
Yeah,
I'm more than happy to do that.
Of course.
Yeah, guys, leave a DM if you want to see that, because that's there's a lot of different opinions, and I think no matter what,
UK against Germans.
For sure. And also, I also want to put it across that I hope we have disagreements, and I hope that we can disagree.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
that's how people will learn also, isn't it?
They are some of the most I've ever learned is speaking to people who don't have the educational ability that I do. Mate, I swear to God, there's nothing more valuable than the ability to speak to somebody like me, and I don't speak to a Hani or I speak to any of those top dog coaches. I think it's really important to understand that no matter how education is just the avenue I decided to go down to make great athletes. They went another direction because of what they had. But going in and having conversations like this and being educated and talking like you're educated should not ever take away the respect that people have for winning bodybuilding shows.